Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mackie's Shining Side Out, Part 2. Show number 587, 780, and 500. In fact, Part 3 of The Unseen, but Part 2 of today's show.
Yes.
And we are going to talk to you about the unseen. The unseen is what we miss, either through, as we learned last week, something called inattentional blindness. We're going to talk about that in a second. Inattention, that's a thing. Selective attention, also a thing, right? And we have filters, also a thing in our vision, right? We have inputs of stimuli that we simply do not process, right? Because we couldn't. We just can't. It would render us completely unable to do anything, and it's important, right? So we've learned about that. We're going to learn about other things. So this is not seeing things that are right in front of you. That's what we're talking about. But there are also things that you can't see because they are in fact hidden from you. Okay, like symbolism, for example, right? Or even more to the point, or on the nose, as it were, things that are hidden by superior technologies, or hidden in a way that Where's Wally is hidden in the Where's Wally picture books, right? Where you're looking for it, but because it's so confusing, it is really hard to see. But we're going to talk about the real physical world as well, of course. The real physical world holds many, many, many things that we simply do not see. We cannot see. Maybe they're too fast. Maybe they're too slow for us to notice, right? And we talked about that as well, right? But Dave, we talked about the gorilla, the invisible gorilla experiment last time. There was the experiment was run again. And this article is called "The Really Scary Invisible Gorilla," which was published in 2013. Why don't you take us into that, my friend?
The invisible gorilla is part of the popular culture nowadays, thanks largely to a widely read 2010 book of that title. In the book, authors and cognitive psychologists Dan Simmons and Christopher Chabris popularized, in American spelling, a phenomenon of human perception known in the jargon as inattentional blindness, which they had demonstrated in a study some years before. In the best-known version of the experiment, volunteers were told to keep track of how many times some basketball players tossed a basketball. We talked about this last week. While they did this, someone in a gorilla suit walked across the basketball court in plain view, stopped in the center of the screen for an extraordinary amount of time. When you watch it again, you know what to look for. Still yet in plain view, yet many of the volunteers to watch the video and count how many times that ball was passed, failed even to notice the beast. Or as a person in a gorilla suit. What the invisible gorilla study shows is that if we are paying very close attention to one thing, we often fail to notice other things in our field of vision. Even very obvious things. We all love these quirks of human perception. It's entertaining to know that our senses can play tricks on us, and that's no doubt the extent of most people's familiarity, I nearly said that right, with this psychological phenomenon. But what if the perceptual quirk has serious implications, even life-threatening implications? A new study raises that disturbing possibility. 3 psychological scientists at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Trafton Drew, Melissa Vo, and Jeremy Wolfe, wondered if expert observers are also subject to this perceptual blindness. I'm going to just go on a hunch that they were. The subjects in the classic study were naive, untrained in any particular domain of expertise, and performing a task nobody does in real life. But what about highly trained professionals who make their living doing specialized kinds of observations? The scientists set out to explore this, and in an area of great importance to many people, cancer diagnosis. I lost both parents to cancer, by the way. And really, I get it. It's very important. Radiologists are physicians with special advanced training in reading various pictures of the body, not just one-shot X-rays of the past, but complex MRI, CT, and PET scans as well. In looking for signs of lung cancer, for example. Hey, I've been growing teeth in my lungs. That's the truth. And in my brain. For example, radiologists examine hundreds of ultra-thin CT images, they're slices, of a single patient's lungs. I've had that done. Looking for tiny white nodules that warn of cancer. It's these expert observers that the Brigham and women's scientists choose to study. They recruited 24 experienced and credentialed radiologists and a comparable group of naive volunteers. They tracked their eye movements as they examined 5 patients' CT scans, each made up of hundreds of images of lung tissue, usually 2 to 3 mil slices. Each case had about 10 nodules hiding somewhere in the scans. And the radiologists were instructed to click on these nodules with a mouse. On the final case, the scientist inserted a tiny image of a gorilla, an homage to the original work. They put this into the lung image, inside the lung. They wanted to see if the radiologists focused on the telltale nodules would be blind to the easily detectable and highly anomalous gorilla. The gorilla was minuscule, but huge compared to the nodules. It was about the size of a box of matches, or 48 times the size of a typical nodule. It faded in and out, becoming more then less opaque over a sequence of 5 images. There was no mistaking the gorilla. If someone pointed it out on the lung scan and asked, "What is that?" everyone would answer, "That's a gorilla." After they were done scrolling through the images as much as they wanted, wow, not even time slotted. Wow, time bugs. The scientists asked them, did that last trial seem any different? Did you notice anything unusual in the final trial? And finally, did you see a gorilla on the final trial? 20 of the 24 radiologists failed to see the gorilla, despite scrolling past more than 4 times on average. So that each of them saw it more than 4 times. And this was not because it was difficult to see. When shown the image again after the experiment, all of them saw the gorilla. What's more, the eye tracking data showed clearly that most of those who did not see the gorilla did in fact look right at it. That's incredible. To their credit, the trained radiologists did detect the anomaly more often than the naive volunteers. Indeed, none of the untrained volunteers reported seeing the gorilla. So it does seem that the experts are somewhat less prone to this form of blindness. It's probable because their full attention capacity is not consumed by the primary task, which they are accustomed to. Reassuringly, the experts were also much better at spotting the warning signs of lung cancer. So not only do they see the cancer, I'm assuming here by extrapolations, they could also identify areas that would be of concern. This is not meant as an indictment of radiologists. The scientists emphasize in an article to appear in the journal Psychological Science, this particular kind of visual search is notoriously difficult. But there is no way round the main finding, which is that 83% of these highly trained physicians missed what might have been a life-threatening anomaly. Like you breathed in a gorilla when you were young and it just lived with you the rest of your life. For anyone relying on radiological diagnosis of a serious disease, it's small comfort that the experts outperformed the average man on the street. I'm just going to say one thing, Mackie. I'm going to hand it to you. I had a break in my foot, and exactly the same thing. I had a radiologist go through both the CT scan and X-rays to tell me there wasn't a break, and of course I could feel the break, and it was there, and it was real because I've broken my other foot. And I said to a treating sports physician, "Look, I'll just give you access to have a look. If you could have a look, and I'll show you where it is. It's on the fourth metatarsal." Right. And he goes, "Wow, that is broken." I said, "Read the notes." I said, "Read the notes," right? And he goes, and the notes say, "There's no discernible breaks or injuries." And I go, "Well, I'm glad you could see what I could see, but I don't know why they couldn't see it."
Because of this.
Exactly.
Because you miss things.
Yes.
And this is really important for us to understand. People will miss things they don't expect to see.
Mm-hmm.
To be clear. Also, if you've already focused your attention on something, that's your filter. You've applied the first filter. The first active filter, the first conscious filter is you were told to look for something. That's the first filter, right? And then there are other filters that come into it. Your own expectations from your own experience, as well as cultural filters. Believe it or not, right? If something appears before you that you've never seen before, chances are you don't know what to make of it. Right? I'll give you again a simple example from the Bible. I apologize.
Here we go.
But, the wheels within wheels.
Yes,
right?
Ezekiel.
This machine that came down and it seemed to be flying, and it was described as having eyes all around and wheels within wheels. It could turn any which way it wanted, but that's the best they could do. It made a lot of noise, so it was hard to miss, right? But it made a lot of noise, so there it is. It's here we are. But if it didn't make a lot of noise, I figure, and if it didn't have any analog in their experience,
mm-hmm.
then they would have been hard pressed to describe it. Like, how do I don't know. I don't have any words for this.
That's the exact point, right? You can only describe something within the ability of your language to piece together parts that make it relative for a conversational passing of the idea to someone else.
Yeah, correct. And yet, we expect these people to be able to see everything and anything. Simply not the case. It's simply not the case. So you will see mostly only what you expect. And in fact, that's a huge part as well. And that's how we recognize patterns as well. Right? Like again, if you read an article and you jumble the words, you jumble the letters and the words, you will still be able to read the words,
mm-hmm.
right? Because we recognize patterns. We are not very good at seeing the detail, right? Now, that's just for stuff that's out there in the world that we
lovely
should be able to
segue.
see. We're getting there. No one's cloaking anything. No one is hiding anything. Nothing, right? This is for stuff that we should be able to see, right? The expectation is.
So what's the next limitation?
Oh, no, I'll give you one other before I go there.
Oh, please.
We spoke about this before, but this is important as well. Because this is another thing that's right in front of you, but it's in the way that you use your eye to look at it, that it becomes visible. And this is the funny pictures, that are sort of
The magic
funny,
eye pictures.
the magic eye, funny pattern pictures. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at them and you just look at them with your regular eyes, as you do, right, trying to focus on it, right, and this is really the problem because you're focusing on it, right, and you have to do the opposite. You have to see through it. It's like, yeah, this is.
I can tell you the actual science behind it.
Yeah.
There's a pattern which is a repeating pattern, but to your eyes, all you see is the pattern when you look at the pattern. But what you have to do is you have to change it so your eyes detach from their focal point and merge the pattern one step towards each other,
Correct.
like you were going a little cross-eyed.
Yeah.
And when you do that, suddenly when they line up, you see an image appear because it's so cleverly created.
Yeah. And it doesn't work for everybody. It works for the most people, but it doesn't work for everybody.
That's
true. The funny thing is this. This is the same. I don't know. If you've done martial arts, you know what I'm talking about. In martial arts, they tell you have to punch through your target.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't trained in any combat or any hand-to-hand fighting, anything like that, you will try to punch at what you see. Chances are you're going to miss it. Or your punch is going to connect quite weakly because
it just impacted on the surface.
Yeah, you just want to hit that thing that you see, like, you're trying to estimate it. Maybe you get it right and it's good for you. But in order to fully make use of your power,
mm-hmm.
which is generated by the hip, in fact, but in order to fully utilize that power that you have, you need to punch through your.
So if it were a hanging punching bag, you would hit the surface and barely deflect the punching bag.
Yeah.
But if you punch through the object, you'll send that thing flying.
100%. And this is the same, as Dave has just explained. You can't focus in on it. You have to unfocus your eyes.
Yeah.
Right. So now, this is important because this is stuff that we should be able to see. Because there's no great trickery as such. No, it isn't. But there's an even bigger limitation that we have on our vision. See, for human beings, vision is the most important sense. If you're not blind, of course, right? Visual and feeling and all that is secondary. Vision is our most primary sensory input, or the one we rely on the most, I should say. Now, the other, and this is a physical limitation. This is an actual limitation that we all have, and that's the frame rate of the human eye. This article was published in 2021. Now, how many frames per second can the human eye see? What rate of speed are we adapted to see? Our eyes aren't moving at a specific speed, but the way visual stimuli are measured is in frames per second, FPS. The visual cues in the world around us move at a particular rate, and our eyes can take in this information at a specific pace of perception. Most experts have a tough time agreeing on the next exact number, but the conclusion is that most humans can see at the rate of 30 to 60 frames per second. Now, we all know this. I mean, if you were to throw a ball into the water or a brick into the water, you see a big splash, but there's no detail. If we had like a high-speed camera that slows it down for us, 1,000 frames per second or whatever it is, then we'll see a rich world of form and shape, and physical interaction that we completely missed in the splash, because all we get is the splash. So if you can see faster, as it were, you see more. Now, there are two schools of thought on visual perception. One is absolute, that the human eye cannot process visual data any faster than 60 frames per second. Okay, and the other school of thought is that it may be possible for some individuals to have some additional perception beyond the rate of 60 frames per second. Now,
I'm nodding because I do. Mine's slightly higher.
Yeah. Now, either way, it doesn't go a lot past 60 frames per second.
That's true.
We're not talking like
120 frames a second.
Yeah.
No, forget it.
So nobody is saying that we have this super perception where we can have tens of thousands of frames per second that we can process. It is just whether or not 60 frames is our limit, or maybe we can go a little bit better than that. And I would agree with Dave that certainly individuals can probably a little bit better than that.
I've had experience where I could see the 60 frames per second or 60 hertz monitor scrolling on its refresh rate.
Yeah, and actually I've seen that as well.
Yeah.
And if I have an interesting example for you guys that happened to me personally. I was in year 11 here in Australia, first year in Australia. I had year 11 and 12 again. It doesn't matter why, English language, etc., etc. But the point is, I was in class, and I said, it was fun and all that. We're sitting down. It's like the class was a fairly large room, and the tables were arranged in a horseshoe around the room with the table of the teacher at the open end of the horseshoe.
Nice.
And I was sitting there facing my friend, and not into the horseshoe, if you will, but to the side of it, into the teacher's direction. Mm-hmm. In fact, I might have even been
at the head of the horseshoe. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And opposite me, not in my field of vision, was someone that was throwing a soccer ball at me.
Wow.
Right? Now, that was a big guy. Like, it was a big guy, and he could throw, fairly. It was also athletic, fairly. I mean, it wasn't a nasty thing. It was just a bit of a, as you do when you're young. You just lollygag around. You do a bit of
lollygag.
I mean, would it have been painful if it hit me? Yeah, I'm sure it would have been.
Yeah.
But this is the interesting part of the story. So I may have perceived motion out of the corner of my eye. I may have, right? I don't remember that, but I do remember this. The ball is in the air, okay? And I turn my head, right? And I see the ball frozen in the air.
Wow.
It's frozen, okay? And I estimate from the size of it, it was probably 1 or 1.5 meters away from my head.
Still to come, yeah.
But it was frozen in the air. It wasn't spinning, it was literally frozen. I didn't see anything else but the ball. Everything else had sort of faded into the background. And I saw the ball frozen. And I moved. And it missed me.
Neo.
It felt really, really strange. But it happened, and I remember this ball that was just frozen. It was just hanging there, frozen in the air. I saw it, and I moved my head just enough so as not to be hit.
Yep.
And I could see the surprise in the other person's face, but it hit the window because I was sitting next to the window. It hit the window with some. It didn't shatter the window, but it hit it hard enough to make a noise. Now it wouldn't have hurt me terribly much, but by the same token, I'm also happy that it didn't hit me. but at that point, in my opinion, I saw faster than my regular frame rate, and everything sort of slowed down, allowing me to instruct my body to get into motion.
So, I'm just going to also provide an anecdote here. So, I was driving a motor vehicle, and a situation occurred in which I had to think and provide options because I was not going to make it. It was a car, sorry, I should say, it was another vehicle sideways across the road, entirely blocking the road. And in that moment, upon immediate realization that I had probably 100 meters of lead time, but it was very fast motion at this point. I remember seeing everything go to black and white. I had plenty of time to make a decision. I could see the routes that I could choose. I could choose the one that was the safest and most, successful route. I chose that, negotiated it between a fence and a power pole successfully. And it's only at that point when I've gone past them that they realized that I was there at all. And then I could only imagine them thinking, did they just drive through me? Right, which I didn't. But I remember everything going to a slightly lower resolution in black and white, was able to make the choices and get it done. And a lot of people, Mekki, who have described, remember those superhuman abilities when there's a need for you to exhibit yourself to save someone. You're not doing it for you, you're doing it for someone else. People have lifted cars up, which would have been impossible for them otherwise. Time, you can reduce time down to like tenths of a second and see it in a way that allows you a very controlled manner of decision-making process.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's what I had to put in there, because that's right. You and I used to work at a place where I could see all the screens scrolling, and that alerted me to my, let's call it, disorder.
Yeah.
I was then scanned on a machine for a company I worked at. It was a medical company, and that proved that it was in the past before that event. And they said they had to recalibrate the machine to be able to deal with the processing speed of my brain. It may not be entirely obvious if I'm talking to you, but it's certainly like I think most active, like agile sports athletes, not people who are just running and sprinting, but people who have interactive games and things. They've got ball sports and things like that, high lie or whatever it is, right? Doesn't matter what it is. If you've got to, be totally athletic and agile and be wary, I think they're the ones where people who are naturally gifted towards that with higher frame rates, I think they're the ones playing those sports. I think you fall into it. It's like if you're born with really fast twinge muscles, then you're going to be more likely to fall into sprinting. You'll discover that at a really early age that you're a very fast runner compared to others.
And your reflexes and such go hand in hand with
your exactly
hand
right.
coordination. Look, I used to play volleyball, and I was actually quite good at it. And again, you have to move your entire body very quickly because the volleyball field is not very big. And I see it with other people as well, other sports, but it has to be an eye-hand coordination sport.
That's right.
Yeah, I think you're 100%.
That's what correct. I meant to make that example. Yeah,
100%, 100%. And running fast, good for you, but that's not gonna. But if there's a task associated with running fast, then that's a whole different thing. No, I completely agree, and you're right. I think top athletes are capable of these feats. I mean, if you see the tennis players, for example, when they have this, I mean, you and I probably wouldn't even be able to. Oh, well, maybe you and I would, but normal people wouldn't be able to see the tennis ball coming at them.
That's right.
Served as a
not 100 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Whoosh! What? It's like,
I used to play. I've got medals.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Right. So it's actually it's a thing, right? And some people, are just maybe that's why they're better at it, because they just have a higher frame rate. Now, how do humans process reality? I love that.
That's a good question.
I love that subheading, right? Now, suppose we are going to consider the rate of speed that humans can process information visually. In that case, we may want to take a moment and break down the processes of how human beings receive, evaluate, and interpret data from their environment. We're very much like a living computer. Our brains, or RAM, which is random access memory, help us process data from our environment. We have several intake sources for data, such as our skin and eyes. This is how you feed information to our memory core. It is similar to using a flash drive to load data to your computer. But how does it work? Step 1, we open our eyes, our input devices, and light then passes through the cornea onto the lens. Step 2, the lens works much like a mirror, focusing the light onto the back of the eye, our internal monitor screen. This area is called the retina. Now, funnily enough, though, it's a reverse image that is reflected onto the retina from what you actually see in the world. So it's upside down. Step 3, the photoreceptor cells in the back of your eye convert the light energy into electrical signals. This is similar to data being converted to ones and zeros in your computer system. Other cells, called rods and cones, pick up motion or movement. The optic nerve carries the electrical signal to our brain, feeding it information. You can compare this to being connected to the internet and your cable providing ones and zeros of data to your computer, which is interpreted, then displayed on your monitor. So it's a fairly lengthy process. What is the frames per second speed of movies and videos in that context? Now, most certainly, but not all, videos and movies are filmed and replayed at a rate of 24 to 30 frames per second.
True.
Watching a video is different from everyday reality. Imagine this. You're a young mother at a park with your children. Your eyes don't merely see a specifically defined area around your children, they take in the entire world around you as one stream of data. While most video is played back at 24 frames per second, they can be recorded in much higher numbers. Every cell phone can easily record up to 720 frames per second. This is a feature that people use when recording something that they want to use for slow playback later.
That's right.
When you see those very cool slow motion action shots, they are filmed at very high frame per second speeds. And Guy Ritchie, I don't know if you've watched many Guy Ritchie movies, but he loves doing that kind of stuff, right? For example. Now, why is flicker rate important? You may have noticed that newer television models and gaming units advertise higher than 60 frames per second video. As human beings, if we cannot see beyond this speed, why would they push the boundaries and invest money in developing technology that uses a faster rate? This difference may be slightly more challenging to understand, but there's a real reason why gamers are excited about the increased speeds. When you take in video data, you're receiving a continual stream of data. When watching a video, it plays in front of your eyes at 24 frames per second. Imagine the long strip of film and 24 individual images sliding past your eyes every second in a linear fashion. Perhaps this could be very simple if we use the projector to watch the film, but we use a technology like computer screens and televisions. This technology adds another, let's call it a dimension to this rate that we view the video. You can check your monitor's label to get a precise number, but it might say something like 60 Hertz. What does this mean? It refers to the refresh rate of your screen. We all know what it is like to hit refresh and wait for a web page to load. Now imagine the screen you are viewing online or any video you're watching is actually refreshing 60 times per second as you watch the linear played video images. It's mind-blowing. This speed of your screen refreshing allows your eyes to perceive the information as a continual stream instead of flashes of light. The higher the frequency, the less ability for humans to detect this flicker or refreshing of the screen. Which is interesting as well, because as Dave has said earlier, he can detect the flicker on some of the...
On the 60 Hertz screens, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if you had a higher refresh rate, right, on your screen, then it would become one continuous view, like we look around in reality. Right now, how fast can our brains register visual data?
You may be wondering if 24 frames per second are enough that we see a continual stream or moving video. Do our eyes actually see each and every image frame? I'm just going to pause it there for a sec. When I'm at the movies and I watch Star Wars, for instance, and the ship flies from left to right or right to left, I can actually see the frames and the ship disappear and appear in the new spot. It bugs me because everyone else is going, wow, look at that. And I go, oh, that's really disappointing. So when it has to do with very fast motion, I actually see it split into the separate images. You might not have noticed that the fresh popcorn ad that was slipped into your movie, but your brain will undoubtedly respond. I need that salty popcorn. Tests have shown, with lots of butter, that we do process each image frame, even if we do it unconsciously. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology dove deep into this topic with a study in 2014 to determine the smallest amount of time needed for the brain to process visual stimuli. You might be surprised. Your supercomputer can process visual data from a single image in only 13 milliseconds. My brain was 0.1, just letting you know. Your processing speed is off the charts. The study blows up what scientists had only theorized in American spelling. Before that, our vision topped out at about 100 milliseconds. New Now, new studies are on the horizon to understand the processing abilities that we can reach and to replicate the methods our eyes perceive data. The numbers from the study back up to some degree that most people could not see more than 60 frames per second. Almost right. At 13 milliseconds per image. It demonstrates that we can see and discern data from images up to 72 frames per second. That's extraordinary. Why does this difference matter? Companies of all sizes use surveillance cameras for security. This could be a single camera for the mom and pop shop down the street, or it could be thousands of cameras at your local casino or airport, for that matter. Law enforcement and government agencies also use surveillance for a variety of reasons, and they've got access to your Amazon doorbell ring thing. When handling a great deal of video footage, frame rates matter a lot. It affects the video size, and it has a huge impact on how you are going to store that data, manage it, analyze it, and protect it. Understanding how many frames per second the human eye can see and choose the right frame rate for your videos are essential for saving time, money, and effort, and storage. So how many frames per second can AI process? That's a really pertinent question. This is a tough question that perhaps cannot be answered entirely at this time. AI is continually expanding and undergoing great strides in its abilities nearly every day. I love the leader. And the AI. If a human being were to sit down and manually look at a single frame image, analyze all the details, then move to the next frame, it would be great to think it could be done at the rate of 3 to 4 images per minute. If an AI system using deep learning methods were to do the same activity, it could efficiently process about 15 to 30 frames per second, nearly the rate at which we take in visual data, which you can call it real-time processing. The amount of visual information that deep learning artificial intelligence systems can process has been compared to the speed of light. It has been shown that some systems can easily read and interpret up to 50,000 frames per second. The rates are getting faster all the time, Mekki.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal. Now, it is important to understand at this point that there are physical limitations on our visual input. And we're not talking about the other senses as well, but again, because sight is the primary sense for us, it is important to understand it and understand the frame rate. Now, Dave, let's just speculate here for a second before we go into an example. If something moved in your field of vision, in the fraction of a second, like let's say it moves through your entire field of vision in a nanosecond, would you be able to see it?
No.
You would not be able to see it because the light from it may very well hit your eye. It may very well become an input, but because it is so insignificant and it's so fast, you cannot process it. So the physical light that has been reflected off that object might very well hit your eye, and it probably will, right?
I'll give you an example of what this means. If you were to stand downrange of someone firing a weapon in front of you, even 20 meters in front, and you were looking parallel to its travel, tangential to its travel, so it would go through your field of vision exactly in the middle. You were set up just right. In a safe bunker, peering out a slot. How's that? That's safety, Mekki.
Yeah.
And you were told 1 second before that it was going to, now the experiment starts now, you've got an unblinking eye ready to completely take in that view, and you will not see it. It went past, but you couldn't see it. Your brain could not process it.
Correct.
And now back to you in the studio.
Yeah, and that's really the point, right? Like, I'll give you a simple example again. These rods that Jose is coming in. We're going to talk about those in some detail in future shows. But these rods, which seem to be moving so fast through our visual field that we simply do not see them unless we see them in slowed down video. So you don't see them. If you're lucky, maybe a flicker. Unlikely that you will, but it's possible, I guess, right? And we simply don't have the capacity to see it. So if anything moves fast, we don't see it. The wings of a hummingbird, the wings of pretty much any insect, even slow-flying beetles, we cannot see. The wings of a fly, we cannot see. They're there, but they're moving so fast we can't see them. The propeller of a plane, okay, we can't see.
It's there for the whole rotation.
Yeah. We can see the blur of it, but we can see through it. I mean, as far as our vision is concerned, we see right through it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's not actually obscuring our vision terribly much. There's a bit of a blur, but we can see through it. It's not.
If you were to put your hand out in front of you and wave your palm about so your fingers are traveling the most, they'll turn to a blur as well. So, and a little experiment you can do at home.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Right? In fact, you do it really fast. There's a blur, but you can see whatever is behind your hand. Okay? So this is important to understand. Now the same goes for the wings of a bee. Now, in fact, we're going to talk about this for a second because it illustrates wonderfully how high-speed photography has changed our life. And it's important in connection to what we witnessed at the Skinwalker Ranch as well. We had no idea how bees were flying. The article I'm sharing with you is called Deciphering the Mystery of Bee Flight, which was published in 2005 in Pasadena, California. One of the most elusive questions in science has finally been answered. How do bees fly? Now you might ask yourself, well, what? Really? Do you remember when we talked about water?
Yes.
And people still don't understand water? Right? So that's pretty much where we are with a lot of stuff in the world. We just don't know. Now, although the issue is not as profound as how the universe began or what kick-started life on Earth, the physics of bee flight has perplexed scientists for more than 70 years. In 1934, in fact, French entomologist Antoine Magnard and assistant André Saint-Leg calculated that bee flight was aerodynamically impossible. The haphazard flapping of their wings simply shouldn't keep the hefty bugs aloft. And yet, bees most certainly fly, and the dichotomy between prediction and reality has been used for decades to needle scientists and engineers about their inability to explain complex biological processes. Now, which was in 2005, Michael H. Dickinson, Esther M. and Abe M. Zarim, professor of bioengineering, and his postdoctoral student Douglas L. Altshuler, and their colleagues at Caltech and the University of Nevada at Las Vegas have figured out how honeybee flight using a combination of high-speed digital photography to snap freeze-frame images of bees in motion and a giant robotic mock-up of a bee wing. The results of their analysis appear in the November 28 issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Again, this was in 2005. We're no longer allowed to use this story about not understanding bee flight as an example of where science has failed because it just is not true, Dickinson says. The secret of honeybee flight, the researchers say, is the unconventional combination of short, choppy wing strokes, a rapid rotation of the wing as it flops over and reverses direction, and a very fast wing beat frequency. These animals are exploiting some of the most exotic flight mechanisms that are available to insects, says Dickinson. Their furious flapping speed is surprising, Dickinson says, because generally the smaller the insect, the faster it flaps. This is because aerodynamic performance decreases with size. And so to compensate, small animals have to flap their wings faster. Mosquitoes flap at a frequency of over 400 beats per second.
That's crazy.
Good luck with seeing that. Birds are more of a womp because they beat their wings relatively slowly. Being relatively large insects, bees will be expected to beat their wings rather slowly and to sweep them across the same wide arc as other flying bugs, whose wings cover nearly half a circle, right? However, they do neither. Their wings beat over a short arc of about 90 degrees, but ridiculously fast at around 230 beats per second. Fruit flies, in comparison, are 80 times smaller than honeybees, but flap their wings only 200 times a second. When bees want to generate more power, for example, when they're carting around a lot of nectar or pollen,
Yeah, that's a good point. Their weight changes, yeah.
Yeah. They increase the arc of their wing strokes, but keep flapping at the same rate.
Oh, wow.
That is also odd, Dickinson says, because it would be much more aerodynamically efficient if they regulated not how far they flap their wings, but how fast. Honeybees' peculiar strategy may have to do with the design of their flight muscles. Bees have evolved flight muscles that are physiologically very different from those of other insects. One consequence is that the wings have to operate fast and at a constant frequency, or the muscle doesn't generate enough power, Dickinson says. This is one of those cases where you can make a mistake by looking at an animal and assuming that it is perfectly adapted. An alternative hypothesis is that the bee ancestors inherited this kind of muscle, and now present-day bees must live with its peculiarities. Rather than having evolved perfect flight, they have to make do with what they have, so to speak. How honeybees make the best of it may help engineers in the design of flying insect-sized robots. Right? You can't shrink a 747 wing down to the size, of an insect and expect it to work, because the aerodynamics are different. But the way in which bee wings generate forces is directly applicable to these devices. Now, the reason we are bringing you this article here to discuss, or to at least be aware of, is because we would not have been able to solve this mystery without the much ballyhooed high-speed photography.
I got a point here. There's a very interesting point that they make there, that the bees today have inherited that skill, those physical traits, from a long lost ancestor, and we know that they've been around since the dinosaurs, right? So, since flowers, right? That's really interesting that they say that, because did you know that there's an experiment currently just being delivered up to the space station, the ISS, where they have plants that they're growing in space and slowly exposing them to more and more direct sunlight, rather than being just grow lights. And the experiment is testing whether the offspring of those plants have changed significantly enough to be able to survive a little more, to be a little bit more tolerant to those, to the energy that it experiences from the direct sunlight.
Wow.
That's the current experiment that they're doing. So this is, remember that punctuated equilibrium experiment. This is an extension of that, and to suggest that we do absolutely change rapidly when the situation changes.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, what are the things, Mekki, that we just don't see? And I think I mentioned one earlier.
Yeah. Look, there are a great many things we do not see because they're moving too fast for our eye-brain system to process, and this includes things that may be a blur. For example, right? There's a speeding bullet, of course, wings of a hummingbird, the wings of nearly all insects, and a propeller in motion. Now, it is really, really important to understand this, right? Now, we don't have enough time, I don't think, to go into the next subject. So let's discuss just very quickly. So the next subject we're going to talk about is phase shift. We're going to talk about that next week. But it's really important to understand at this point that we have demonstrated the limitations of our visual perception. That our perception, as great as it is, as great as our abilities are, we are not capable of seeing the world as it really is. We just can't. Things are moving too slow, right? I mean, we see a tree, but we don't see a tree grow. We perceive a tree grow over the years. We understand it grows, but we don't see it grow. You know what I mean?
We can do time lapse on a seedling and watch it grow within our grasp.
But tech, yeah, absolutely, 100%.
I love those high speed guys. I think that's what they're called, or slow mo guys. He's got a channel. It's really good. Shout out to them. And they do what Mythbusters have left behind, which is like a gap, and they do all sorts of crazy explosions, and you get to see the shockwaves.
Yes,
just amazing what 1/10 of a second will reveal in a million frames a second.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So you have our inability to see very, very slow things. You have our inability to see very, very fast things. You have our inability to see things which we don't expect to see. You have our inability to see things which we ignore because we've been instructed to see something else.
And what about like the things that are outside the visible that we can't see?
Exactly. Right? And in fact, this is a good point. I mean, there are things that exist outside our visual range. It's just what it is, right? We can't see it because it is simply not within the bands of light that we see. Okay?
For instance, the reason why we have those helmets for welding is because the arc produces, it's just high energy, but it produces UV light, and that'll separate your retina.
Yes.
If it'll burn your retinas really quickly if you stare at it. If squinting does nothing. The goggles, they do nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to do that. We can't see it, and you barely feel it. It's like the sun's energy when, UV A, B, and C hit it, we can barely tell. I've got scars on my arms that appear to be backlit when there's a lot of UV. And that's my little UV detector right there. I just found it correlated to the amount of UV, and sure enough, it's good enough for me to be able to see it. But I can't see it directly. I see an effect related to it. And that's also part of the unseen world.
Not completely. Now, think about it this way. Like, we can't actually observe the universe using visible light. Okay, what we use is radio telescopes. So we actually observe radio. And we can't see radio waves. You can't see radio waves. You can't see any broadcast waves that we use, like television.
You can't see Bluetooth.
Can't see any of that.
Wi-Fi.
Yet there it is. We know it's there because we see the effects of it. We can't see it. You can measure it if you've got the right devices, and you can certainly intercept it if you've got the right device to intercept it and then to, take advantage in decoding it, whatever the information might be. But you can't see it. In fact, X-rays they're part of the spectrum, but we didn't discover them until about 100 or so years ago. This is a whole.
You can't see them.
No,
and they pass straight through you.
That's right. But if we had X-ray vision, if we could see into that spectrum, could see into ourselves. We could see into things, right?
Wow.
That ordinary light is because X-rays. Okay, let me put it this way. So the light that we see, the white light, is reflected off surfaces. And that's what we see, okay? X-rays, which are deeper in the spectrum, are going through things, okay? And depending on what they're going through, they indicate mass. So they will move through some things faster and through other things slower, which will give you visual information if you could see it. And we can with X-rays, of course. But if your eye could see it, then you could see it too, because we would no longer be restricted by white light that is reflected off most surfaces. The X-rays, if we could see it, we could now see into things.
I'm going to blow your mind.
Go.
Nothing has color.
No, that's exactly right.
Nothing that you see has color.
100%.
In sunlight, I'm going to give you an example. The world that you observe, no objects actually have color. What they do is absorb all of the colors of the spectrum, except for that they reflect. They can't absorb it. It's just a thing that they can't do. So the actual surface doesn't have a color, but rather it absorbs energy and emits energy at a certain wavelength, and that's the color you see.
100% correct.
And that is astonishing. And two people don't quite see the same color. And there's a name for that because our spectrum is slightly shifted left or right between people.
Yep.
We don't all have a fixed, exact view. And then our rods and cone shapes and our brain processing. Each one of those contributes to it. I heard a whole study on this on Friday afternoon. So, yeah, it's quite something. And if you look at a beetle's shell that is iridescent, and what's the bird with the big eyes, big shaped feathers? It doesn't have color in its feathers, but rather interferes with light to then make it appear those colors, like that. Anyway, like the shell of the beetle, right? And there's a couple of seashells that have that same beneath. Hey, I think I can hear the music starting.
You're kidding. Oh, jeez. That was quick. Far out.
Well, you can take us out.
Hey, look, this has been Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out. Thanks so much for listening. We love having you with us. Don't go anywhere. There's something coming up after this. I think it's Jerbear.
It is.
After hours. So stick around for that. But thank you for allowing us into your living rooms. And next week and during the week, in fact, come to Play This Dave and Shiny Side Out next week.